We've got 78 games on the slate on Saturday. Here's a look at two of the notable games. Number 3, Ohio State hosting number 12, Oregon, noon Eastern. Oregon 0-9 all-time against Ohio State. Last meeting was in the 2014 National Championship, first year of the college football playoff. Rivalry renewed in Ames, a top 10 showdown between Iowa and Iowa State as they clash in the Cy-Hawk game. Cyclones have lost 5 straight against the Hawkeyes. It's the 68th meeting between the schools, first time with both ranked in the AP poll. Welcome in Vegas insider Todd Fuhrman and former Louisiana running back Emory Hunt, who joins us from the Caesars Sportsbook at Wild Wild West in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Start with the big game in Columbus, Oregon visiting Ohio State. Star defensive end and projected top 3 pick Kayvon Thibodeaux dealing with a sprained ankle. Game time decision. Buckeyes a 14.5-point favorite. Total 63.5. Buckeyes rolled up 45 points on Minnesota last week, thanks in part to C.J. Stroud, 4 second-half touchdowns. Todd, does the start time have any impact on how you're wagering on this game, considering it's 9 a.m. Pacific for the Ducks?
It's a great question, Akeem, and I won't have a huge impact in terms of my handicap, but I do think it can play a role, but maybe not as big a role as Ohio State having 2 extra days to prepare for this game compared to Oregon, who also gives up a day traveling across the country to play this contest at what'll feel like 9 a.m. for the kids from the West Coast. But you look at Kayvon Thibodeaux, and you mentioned it, game time decision here, good sign of optimism for Oregon. He at least appears to have traveled with the team out there. But dealing with an ankle injury, I'm not quite sure how effective he's going to be. And when you look at this Oregon defense, they're down Drew Mathis in their linebacking core. And Justin Flo and Noah Sewell talked last week about how communication was an issue. I'm not sure that gets easier against a superior opponent in hostile territory. Sure, Oregon will be buoyed by a couple members of their secondary returning from suspension. But on the other side of the ball, I look at this Ohio State team, and I think C.J. Stroud started to get his feet under him in that second half. You look at what the Buckeyes were able to do, breaking a school record for yards per play at more than 10.3 per offensive snaps. They ran 45 plays from scrimmage last week on offense, the fewest we've seen from the Buckeyes in a game since 2015. And I think when you look at the wealth of riches they have in their backfield, those guys will eat. Olave and Wilson will have a big day. And when you look at the Oregon Ducks, this is a team just 1-5 against the spread the last 6 times they found themselves as double-digit dogs. I think this is a class difference here. It gets ugly, and it gets ugly early.
I see this is a game of athletes, and Oregon has athletes. Some of the teams in the Big Ten don't. And if you put Ohio State in the Pac-12, they match up well. You put Ohio State in the SEC, they match up well. You put Minnesota in either one of those conferences, they get the doors blown off. And so when you look at Oregon, athlete for athlete, that's where the game is going to be won. So you look on the perimeter. I like Oregon to cover here. Anthony Brown's a tremendous quarterback. I think their matchup favors them on the outside. So the passing game should have success against that Ohio State secondary. But you guys both brought up a good point about Kayvon Thibodeaux. If that ankle is 75%, guess what Ohio State is going to do? They're going to run right at him and see how well that ankle is. But I do feel like this will go back and forth. We saw Minnesota have success throwing the football against the secondary. That same problem presents itself against Oregon, who has much better athletes and a better quarterback than Minnesota does. So I see this one going back and forth, high-scoring affair. So I'm taking Oregon in the points.
2 different perspectives there with Emory and Todd. They're on the opposite sides. Emory likes the points with Oregon. Todd says, nah, I'm laying the points with the Buckeyes. Their home opener there in Columbus. All right, we've got a top 10 showdown in Ames where a rivalry is renewed. Iowa and Iowa State clash in the Cy-Hawk game. Iowa State has lost 5 straight against Iowa, but the Cyclones favored by 4.5 in this game, favored against the Hawkeyes for the first time since 2000. This is really interesting. The under is 13-2 in the past 15 meetings. Totals 46.5, Todd. Do we keep riding that trend?
Yeah, I'm going to go right back to that well, Hakeem. You look at the results these two teams put forth a week ago, and I think a lot of people are ready to hit the panic button when they saw the final score. Iowa State outlasted Northern Iowa 16-10, despite being a 4-touchdown favorite in that game. Meanwhile, if you're looking at the scoreboard, you see Iowa put an absolute walloping on Indiana 34-6. But digging into those 2 box scores tells very different stories. Iowa State really hampered what Northern Iowa was able to do, especially running the football. Meanwhile, Iowa benefited from 2 pick sixes, 1 big play early from Tyler Goodson, and other than that, they were pretty average. I look at this Iowa offense led by Spencer Petras, and he just doesn't cut it for me. When you're talking about some of Iowa's skill position players, whether it's Tyrone Tracy, or Goodson. Those are the guys that have to have breakout performances on this kind of stage. I love the fact that Iowa State doing everything they can to troll their in-state rivals, busting out the black jerseys here, something that Iowa typically wears. And you look at what Brock Purdy and Breece Hall have been able to accomplish, resurrecting this program for Matt Campbell. If you're not going to beat the Hawkeyes now, I don't think it's ever going to happen. But the way that Iowa State needs to do it is with defense, and Iowa, no slouch in that department either. Best yards per play defense going back to the start of last season. I'm going under the total, hoping that the trend is indeed our friend, and we're going to 14-2 under the total the last 60.
You know, I feel like everybody watches Iowa State beat up on Kansas, and they make their decisions based off that. But I tend to watch Iowa State when they play big games. Seem like they can't match up against Northern Iowa. They lost to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. They lost in the Fiesta Bowl to Oregon. They're losing all these big games. Louisiana beat them. That's another big game that they lost. So every time they get up for a big game, they come out on the other side of the scoreboard. So to me, Iowa has their number, especially under Matt Campbell. And Iowa, to me, can get pressure on Brock Purdy, who doesn't handle pressure very well. And I'm talking about pressure from the opposing defense and pressure from the situation. He tends to make bad mistakes, and you can't make any mental mistakes or physical ones against Iowa. We saw that last week and how that defense is just ready to pounce. So I'm taking Iowa in the points here against Iowa State.
Iowa has allowed less than 25 points in 23 straight games. I mean, that is absolutely eye-popping. Certainly plays to the under in this matchup. All right, now let's get your favorite ATS wager for Saturday. Todd, what stands out to you?
I'm going to go to a group of 5 programs in a college football venue that most people probably will never set foot in DeKalb, Illinois, where Northern Illinois welcomes in Wyoming. And I'm going to lay the points here with the road team. I know the Cowboys didn't exactly light the world on fire with a 19-16 come-from-behind victory against Montana State last weekend. But when you dig into that game a little bit, Wyoming's offense couldn't get on track running the football. And I think Sean Chambers having a game under his belt, returning from injury alongside Xavier Holiday, will pay dividends in this particular spot. Northern Illinois, hey, I'm going to tip my hat to what Thomas Hammock's bunch was able to accomplish, winning outright on the road in Atlanta against Georgia Tech. But they were outgained in that contest. They were gifted short fields a couple of times there. And when you look at Rocky Lombardi, I think he's going to find it extremely tough sledding against this Wyoming defensive backfield. Meanwhile, so much of what NIU was able to do against Georgia Tech was getting Harrison Whaley involved on the ground. You can't run into a defensive front from Craig Bull. I think Wyoming looks to be a much more complete football team this week than what we saw last week. NIU comes crashing back to earth. I'm going to lay the modest number here with the Cowboys on the road.
I'm laying the -4 with Liberty. I think their schedule sets up for them perfectly. They can go on a long run. November is going to be big for them. They have Louisiana, and then they have Ole Miss, and they can run the table in those 2 games. They may even be undefeated by that point. So it starts with taking care of business against Troy. You look at Malik Willis. To me, he is the best quarterback from an NFL prospect perspective in the country. He runs a 4.4. He can throw the ball far like Michael Vick. He is the ultimate game breaker, and they take on a Troy defense that can give up the big play every now and then. And we know Malik Willis doesn't need much to generate those chunk plays. Lay those points with Liberty.
Liberty and covers for all. That's what the full screen there said. That's TV jargon. That's the graphic. They've covered in 9 straight games. Liberty, the cover kings. All right, now let's get your best wager on a total. Todd, what's the over-under you are targeting on Saturday?
We'll go to an in-state showdown, Hakeem, in the Sooner State that'll pit Oklahoma State going up against Tulsa. And Oklahoma State got some good news this week. Spencer Sanders expected to return under center. The problem for Oklahoma State, can Spencer Sanders be game ready? He hasn't really seen a whole lot of reps dealing with COVID protocols, just back to practice. You look at Oklahoma State last week, this is an offense that lacks some of that elite high-level talent that we've grown accustomed to at the skill positions over the last couple of years. You know, Tylan Wallace, Chubba Hubbard, the list goes on and on for what they've been able to produce. Meanwhile, Tulsa, they're going to look to try and bounce back from a disappointing effort, to say the least, losing outright as a 23-point favorite against UC Davis. And this is a Golden Hurricane team that wants to run the ball. They want to play physical football and shorten the game, especially against Big Brother. This has all the makings of a slugfest. I know Oklahoma State and unders don't necessarily go hand in hand, but I really like this Cowboys defense, and I think we're talking about the first team to 27 winning this football game max. I'm going under 51.5.
I like the over in the BC UMass game. Boston College is one of the top teams in college football. UMass is one of the worst teams in college football. So those two numbers add up for me. Just trust that over against UMass. The Minutemen, they're trying hard. They hadn't played since 2019, so they're working themselves back into college football Division I shape. But Boston College right now with Yurkovich at the quarterback position, doing a great job offensively. They're just one of the top offenses we're going to see in the ACC, and they just meet up against one of the worst defenses in college football in UMass. So definitely the over here should hit.
All right, sprinkles are for winners. We're here to give you some winners. Todd, what's your favorite money line sprinkle for Saturday's slate?
We're going to back one of the worst teams in college football, a team that I have power rated 127 in the country. But value comes in all unique shapes and sizes, my friends. And when you look at Bowling Green catching 14 against South Alabama, who are the Jaguars to lay that kind of number? I think Bowling Green is more than live as a potential underdog, upset winner in this particular spot. South Alabama, an emotional win last week, beating Southern Miss. They were dominant on the defensive line. And when you look at Jake Bentley in his 37th year of college football, he's the consummate pivot when it comes to distributing the ball. But I think Bowling Green is going to have relished the opportunity of stepping up as far as physicality is concerned against Tennessee. They'll get a little home cooking for the 12 Falcon fans that'll actually be in attendance here. And I think Bowling Green has a chance to take this game down to the wire. I'm more than happy to take an aggressive price here with one of the worst college football has to offer.
I'm going to go with Colorado over Texas A&M. This is an old school Big 12 matchup between these two squads. Big fan of Jarek Broussard and what he does in the run game. I love the secondary of Colorado, and quite honestly, these two teams are built very similar. So they're good up front. They can run the football with their tremendous tailbacks, and they have really good secondary. So I see this one as a tight game. And I know A&M is still working their quarterback into rhythm, breaking him in, to the fold. But this is going to be a physical run game defense type of matchup, which means it's going to fall under that number. Plus, I think Colorado has a little bit more explosiveness, on offense to really take this one home. I think they can get the win.
Wow. All right, we'll see about that. Again, 78 college football games on the slate on Saturday. Great day for a parlay. Todd, let's have a day, kid. What do you have for us?
Yeah, we're going to go with a trio of totals here, and we'll get things started in the SEC. We'll take Missouri and Kentucky to go over the total. When you look at what Kentucky is this year, it's a far cry from an offense that was run first, run about 70% of the time last season. They want to get out there. They want to air it out, play with tempo. I think it's going to take odds makers a little while to adjust. We'll go to the Degenerate Special, the latest kickoff on the board in Corvallis as well, and expect Oregon State's offense to look much more dynamic against Hawaii this week than what we saw in West Lafayette last week. Meanwhile, Chevin Cordero and company, they started to show some promise last weekend in a home game against Portland State. I think all we need is 24 points from the Rainbow Warriors to get us over the total. And last but not least, I'm looking for a rock fight in Ann Arbor. Washington could be down as many as 4 scholarship wide receivers, leaving only 4 left on their active roster. This is a team that has to run the ball to be successful. And even in their loss against Montana last week, it was not a reflection of anything they did on the defensive side. Look for Washington to shorten the game, be tenacious in the trenches, and I think this Michigan defense can't really get threatened by the lack of explosive playmakers that Washington boasts on the offensive side.
I totally agree with Ty with Missouri. I'm a big fan of Connor Bazelak and what he does throwing the football. I think Kentucky got hyped up over what they did against UL Monroe, and that's just not a really good picture of what Kentucky truly is. We'll find out this week, but I like Missouri to cover there. We talked about Oregon, we talked about Iowa, but NC State -1. I feel like NC State is the real underdog right now in the ACC. Offensively, they're explosive. On defense, they can get after the quarterback. They're going to be dynamic within the front 7. This is a really good NC State team, so those are my parlay picks for this weekend.
Wow, plus 1228 for Emory Hunt. Those are great parlays. Appreciate it, guys. Enjoy the games on Saturday, week 2 of the college football season. Here's a look back at the parlays. First up, Emory Hunt. He likes Oregon and the points at Ohio State, Iowa and the points at Iowa State, NC State to cover the 1 at Mississippi State, Missouri +5 at Kentucky, 12-1. And this is that's pretty wild. Plus 1228 to hit on this parlay. As for Todd's parlay, 3 legs, a night parlay, 7:30, 8, 11 o'clock Eastern time. So you don't have to worry about the early games in terms of his parlay. Missouri, Kentucky over 56, Hawaii, Oregon State over 65, and Washington and Michigan under 48.5 Odds to hit on that one, plus 596. As for the rest of their picks on Saturday, Emory likes Oregon. They're split here a lot. Todd likes Ohio State to cover the 14.5. Last week they pushed against Minnesota. Emory says, no, I'm taking the points with the Ducks. They're going to cover on the road. They are, though, 0-9 all-time against Ohio State straight up. Under and Iowa here is the play for Todd and Emory. Again, the under between these two schools, 13-2 in the last 15 meetings. The Cy-Hawk game in Ames, Iowa. Best ATS wager, Wyoming -7. Emory going with Liberty -4. They've covered 9 straight games. Best total wager, Tulsa, Oklahoma State, under 51. BC, UMass, over 58 for Emory. And then Moneyline sprinkle, Bowling Green, plus 450. Colorado, plus 600 against Texas A&M.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.